Hello, welcome back to my camcorder footage. Today we are going to be talking about a classic movie, Re-Animator. Came out in 1985 and the director is Stuart Gordon. It's a story based loosely on an H.P. Lovecraft story. So let's dive right into it. The movie starts out in Switzerland. Some doctor named Dr. Gruber is on the floor screaming. Everyone in the hospital is like, "Ah! What's going on, Dr. Gruber? Dr. Gruber!" He's on the ground having a seizure of some kind. Whenever he gets like really strange in the face and his eyes pop out and we hear squishy sounds. Some lady is like, "What have you done?" And a man is like, "I've just saved his life."
You killed him.
I gave him life.
Time for the opening credits. The opening credits in this movie are fantastic. I mean, the art alone, it's like black background with beautiful drawings that look like colors lit up in black light of skulls and muscles and faces. It's really just beautiful artwork with your 80s horror music in the background. Actually, the music, some may say, is a ripoff of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Either way, it's a great opening credits scene. Okay, the first scene after the opening credits, very important, especially to those of you who have seen the movie before. We see our medical student named Daniel, short for Dan, which is what everyone calls him. He is doing chest compressions, trying to revive a nude woman. Which I guess typically, whenever you revive somebody, their chest has to be exposed and nude, but you guys, this is an 80s movie, so right off the bat, we're gonna see some boobies. And yes, they are boobies of the dead kind. So he's doing these chest compressions on this woman, they have the defibrillator, but it's not working, her thing is just flatlining. What do they call it?
Straight line.
Her lifeline is just flatlined. And the woman is like, "Okay, Dan, enough, okay."
Kane, we have done everything that can be done for this woman.
He's like, come on, she just needs more time.
She just needs a little more time for the drugs to circulate.
And the lady doctor that's present is like, "Dan, stop. A good doctor knows when to stop." So he stops. She's like, "Take that body to the morgue."
A good doctor knows when to stop.
Dr. Harrod,
Take her to the morgue.
So that's exactly what he does. Because he's not a doctor, he's a medical student. He follows orders, takes that body to the morgue. Well, we meet the security guard. You can expect to find him sitting there, porn magazine in hand, always ready to crack a joke about how his job is pointless.
Don't know why they keep locked doors around here. Nobody wants in, and ain't nobody getting out.
So in the morgue, Dan meets Herbert West.
What were you researching? Death.
Herbert West, you may think, is a doctor because he's such a know-it-all, but really he's also a student who has transferred here from Switzerland.
He was doing independent research in Switzerland with Dr. Gruber shortly before he died.
And he knows all about brain science. And while Herbert West is in there meeting Dan, he also meets Professor Dr. Hill.
This is our eminent brain researcher and grant machine, Dr. Carl Hill.
And Dr. Hill, he is the professor that specializes in brain science, while Herbert West has a few things to say to Dr. Hill.
Your theory on the location of the will in the brain is interesting. Though derivative of Dr. Gruber's research in the early 70s. So derivative, in fact, that in Europe it's considered plagiarized.
He's like, I find that your research on brain science is extremely outdated, sir. Well, Dr. Hill doesn't take too kindly to this.
Frankly, Dr. Hill, your work on brain death is outdated.
Did I also mention that Herbert is a hottie? I mean, at first I was like, okay, Dan is gonna be the hunk of the movie. But then Herbert comes in with those glasses on, and I'm like, ooh. Then we see a random girl named Megan, short for Meg. She's getting and getting hard by Dan.
Oh, Rufus.
Dan is getting it on with his fiancée, Meg. And afterwards, they're canoodling in Dan's apartment. We see that behind his bed is a giant Talking Heads poster. And she's like, "Oh, Dan, as soon as you get your MD, I'm gonna marry you."
The minute you get your MD, I'll marry you.
Which is reason enough to become a doctor, if there's any reason. I mean, this girl is a hottie, probably the best that Dan is ever gonna have. So he's very motivated to finish school so he can secure the girl, have his dream. So Meg's in a bit of a rush. She gets dressed, and Dan, he's being a bit of a flirt.
Dan, stop! Don't!
And they're having some flirtation going on.
Dr. Dan!
Chasing her around the apartment when BAM!
Come here! Come to me! What?
Hi.
Herbert West is in there, seeing Dan in the nude. Pretty homoerotic if you ask me. Well, he is there to view their apartment because he found their listing because they're saying that they need a roommate. He's like, "I've come to check out your apartment." And Meg's like, "Oh, I don't know about that. I'm about to walk out the door." He's like, "Can I view it? Do you have a basement?" They're like, "Yeah, we'll show you the basement."
Oh, yes.
So he goes down, he's like, "This is perfect. I've already got my stuff outside. I'm ready to move in."
I think this will be just fine. I have my things outside. Shall I move in now?
Meg is like, "Whoa, hold on. We need to talk about this first."
I think you and Mr. West have a lot to discuss before you decide anything.
Oh, I've decided.
Meg is being, cautious because she's a woman in society. She's like, "I don't know about you, man, you random man. Why did you leave Switzerland?"
There was no more I could learn there.
I guess that's a sufficient explanation because soon after he moves in. Okay, so now we are back at the hospital in medical school class. Dr. Hill is demonstrating how to properly scalp a person. It's just like peeling an orange, apparently.
Forward, over the head. It's very much like peeling a large orange.
He peels back the skin, gets the skull saw, teaches them how to saw a skull, and then pulls out some brain mush and is like, "Look at this, students." And it looks pretty real. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't know brains from pig guts, but it looks like a real brain if you ask me. So something Dr. Hill teaches the class, but also us, is that the brain can only survive 6 to 12 minutes after the heart stops.
6 to 12 minutes. 6 to 12 minutes.
Herbert West is over there with the rest of the students, only he's like, breaks a pencil.
An obsessive desire. Perhaps it takes...
And Dr. Hill sees him break the pencil and is like, "Whoa, that's enough for today, class."
Mr. West, I suggest you get yourself a pen. Class dismissed.
Well, Herbert does not like that. They start to get in a screaming match in the middle of class. Herbert's like, "How dare you teach these students these falsities? How dare you?"
You know, you should have stolen more of Gruber's ideas, then at least you'd have ideas.
Mr. West!
And Dr. Hill is like, "This is preposterous. You, a student? You don't know anything."
There's gonna be a pleasure to fail you.
I am over here like, what is he talking about? Because I'm pretty sure that's fact. Like, I'm pretty sure after the heart stops, like, the brain only lasts for so long. So what does Herbert know that I don't? Dr. Carl Hill attends a very fancy dinner with his supervisor, Dr. Alan Halsey. Meg. She is the daughter of the dean of the medical school, Dr. Halsey. Well, it's just the three of them at this candlelit dinner. From this very scene, I was able to tell that Dr. Hill has a bit of a crush on Meg. That was very clear from the get-go. I mean, maybe it's not clear to some male viewers who watch this movie, but I could tell. I could tell that Dr. Hill had a thing for Meg, because he's sitting there at the dinner table, you know, questioning her boyfriend.
Your daughter is seeing Kane, eh? You think that's wise, Alan?
To her father, he's like, "So, Meg is dating Dan, huh?" And she's like, "Oh yes, he's actually about to pick me up right now and we're gonna go study together." And he's like, "Study together?"
Why don't you study here?
And she's like, "Oh no, we're gonna leave to go study together." I'm like, back off, you creep. I mean, Dr. Hill looks older than her father. Probably the same age as her father, if not older.
My esteemed colleagues, capable, beautiful, loving daughter. The obsession of all who fall under her spell.
So the very next scene, we see that Megan is in Dan's apartment, and she is not happy. She is just letting it all out, ranting to her boyfriend about their new roommate, Herbert West. I mean, to name a few things, she's very creeped out that he never leaves his room. And their black cat, Rufus, he always freaks out when he's around West. It's very clear that her cat doesn't like him.
Rufus is terrified of him. When Wes comes in, he runs and hides.
If there's one thing I know, being a paranormal enthusiast, is that you should trust your pets. So Meg was definitely onto something here. She's like, "Speaking of Rufus, like, I usually hear him walking around or at least knocking something over. It's really weird." So she freaks out, and as a cat mom myself, I can relate to this experience of being like, "Oh my god, like, I haven't heard my cat in a while. I need to find my cat." So she starts wandering around the house, and Dan's wandering around calling for Rufus. She's looking everywhere. They don't even hear the jingle of his collar. The only place she hasn't looked is Herbert West's room. So she's like, "I gotta look there," you know? She opens the door. She's like, "Rufus! Rufus, are you there?" And we all know we're about to find the cat dead, because when in a horror movie do we ever have a pet that survives? So she creeps into the room, looks around. We don't see anything. She steps forward, and sitting on the ground is a little mini fridge, and it was already partially open. She didn't even open the fridge. She just stumbled upon the open fridge to see Rufus! Rufus is dead in the fridge! Well, fun fact, not really. They used a real dead cat for this scene. Yes. That very same Rufus you're seeing in the fridge was once a very lively black cat. Rest in peace. So she's in there, she finds her cat, she screams. Well, little does she know, behind her, Herbert West has come home. He's like, "What are you doing in my room? Get out of here!"
What are you doing in my room?
And she's like, "Oh, like, I didn't kill Rufus. He was dead when I got home. Well, Dan hears the commotion. He comes in like, what's going on in here? And she's like, Rufus! He killed Rufus! He's like, no. Rufus was going through the trash and suffocated. What was I supposed to do? Leave you a note before I left saying, hey, your cat's dead?
What a note say, Dan? Cat dead, details later. I knew you were fond of it.
She is hell-bent on thinking that Herbert West killed Rufus. And he says that he didn't kill Rufus. Dan is like, you know, kind of somewhere in the middle, but definitely more suspicious than not of Herbert West. Because why would you put him in the fridge? Well, apparently he was like, I was trying to find a way to tell you. I didn't want the cat to be stinking and rotten when you guys got home, so I put it in the fridge to preserve it. Yeah, totally normal behavior. Anybody would do that. Serial killer behavior. Serial killer. If it wasn't obvious before, Herbert West is missing a few pieces in his brain, a few pieces of empathy that normal people have, you know? So whenever Dan goes to examine the fridge with the taxidermied cat inside the fridge, who's a very real dead Rufus to them, beloved Rufus, tragic Rufus, he also finds a very mysterious bottle with a electric green-yellow liquid inside. And Herbert West is like, don't touch that! What are you doing in my room? Don't go through my things! Very suspicious.
What the hell is this?
While furious Herbert West tells them to get the fuck out of his room, or else. Or else he's gonna tell the dean, Dr. Halsey, that Dan is dating his daughter, Meg. And we'll see how long he stays in school after that fact gets around.
Yeah, I think it is my
Just,
business.
this is none of my business that you're sleeping with Dean Halsey's daughter. Oh, you know, I would not want to see a fellow student, especially one as promising as yourself, be thrown out of school, out of the profession, on moral grounds.
I don't see the validity in this threat, seeing as at dinner last night, you know, we saw that Dr. Halsey was very much okay and approved of his daughter dating Dan. Maybe it's like in the same way that boss-employee relationships are inappropriate. Maybe it's like the dean's daughter dating a medical student is inappropriate. I don't know. Honestly, I've never thought about the intricacies of dating in medical school like this. But that threat is very real to them, so they get out of the room. The movie really has picked up speed ever since she was looking for Rufus. So, later on that night, they're asleep in bed, and Dan is hearing this animal screeching. So he wakes up in a fright, and he's like, Herbert, are you in there? And he has his baseball bat in his hand because he thinks there's an intruder or some kind of possum with rabies. I don't know. But he's got his bat, and he is ready to fight. Well, Herbert isn't answering his door. And so Dan follows the sound all the way to the basement door, but it's locked. So he shoves his body in the basement door, doesn't budge. Shoves his body in the basement door, it doesn't budge. He shoves his body in the basement door, crashes down the stairs into the very room where the screeching is coming from. Very intense scene right now. I'm like, whoa, what's about to happen? Well, guess what? Herbert's down there also screaming. He's got a black cat scratching the out of his back. He's like, get it off me! Get it off me! Get it off of me! And Dan goes into fight or flight mode. He chose fight. So he takes his bat and starts hitting the cat and gets the cat off of him. But it's not enough because cats have 9 lives.
What the hell is it? Later! Later!
The cat is also in fight or flight mode. As a cat whisperer myself, I can tell from the way the cat was meowing. My cat, her ears were like, when she was hearing this cat go crazy. Because this cat is stressed the out. It's flying around, you know, it's in the locker. It's on this side now, and they're chasing it around. One of them has a baseball bat, one of them has a croquet stick, and they are both taking turns like whack-a-mole, you know? Everywhere the cat pops up, they beat it, and the cat is still just going crazy. So, if you're following along, you may notice a little similarity here. Rufus, yeah, he was a black cat. Guess what? This cat that is going rogue in the basement, he's also a black cat. So that very same cat we saw dead in the fridge earlier is now going berserk. They beat it to smithereens. They throw it on the wall, throw it on this wall, whack, 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 until it is just a pile of fur and guts. Dan is in a state of shock. He is just panting, reeling from the events that just happened, and we hear Herbert West laugh maniacally at the situation. After all this happens, Dan, he wants explanations. So ultimately, West comes clean. He's like, look, dude, I have conquered brain death. You know that whole thing about how the brain only lasts 6 to 12 minutes after the rest of the body stops? Well, I've conquered that. I have brought several different animals back to life. The only issue is they all turned violent in the end, so you're gonna help me figure this out, and we're both gonna get rich and famous from this.
The solution reaction has become more violent. My research has become more difficult.
So it is in this moment that we learn Herbert West's true motivations in life, you know? He doesn't want to bring the undead back to life just for the simple joy and pleasure of having your loved ones back. Oh, no, 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 no. Not for the greater good, either. He is very selfishly motivated, that Herbert West is. He wants to be famous. He wants to be the first scientist with this discovery. He wants it to be named after him. He wants fortune, and he wants never-ending life.
We can achieve every doctor's dream. You'll be famous and live lifetimes.
Dan is like, whoa, 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 dude, you're crazy right now. He's like, that cat, it couldn't have been dead. You just slowed its heart rate and lowered the body temperature, and when you injected it, it revived its heart rate. I mean, this is impossible. You can't bring things back to life. Herbert West is like, don't believe me? Just watch.
Do you agree that he's dead now?
And he gets that green serum that Dan had found in the fridge earlier in his bedroom. He gets that, puts it in one of those little shot injection thingies, injects it into Kitty. And here we get one of the most disturbing scenes out of this movie. It is sweet, sweet Rufus brought back to life, but it is something out of a nightmare because Rufus is still blood and guts.
Why'd you make that noise?
Birth is always painful.
It's like seeing a cat that got run over but is still alive, you know? Like watching Rufus be alert but still be like dismembered and have his guts on the outside. You know, I just was like, oh my God, somebody put him out of his misery. Like, it is horrifying. The special effects here are very dated, but if you're able to insert yourself in the situation like I am, it's pretty gruesome and horrifying. Rufus looks like a little stuffed animal kitty at this part. They obviously didn't use the real life cat in this scene. It's like a little puppet because he's like meow, 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 but making really sad, horrific cat noises. Well, guess what? Meg apparently was hearing all this commotion. How could she not? Because she's in the basement now, like, oh, Rufus! Rufus, no! What have you done? She's traumatized. So the very next morning, Dan immediately goes to the dean, Dr. Alan Halsey, and he tells him what happened last night. Well, Dr. Halsey's a bit triggered whenever he hears the fact that his daughter was involved in this very traumatic situation. And he, enters fatherly protective mode.
What have you been doing with my daughter?
She walked into an experiment.
You've involved Megan in your insanity?
He's like, how dare you have my daughter there? He doesn't believe it. He thinks that Dan is just making it up.
As of now, he is no longer a student of this university.
From hearing this story, he fired both Dan and Dr. Herbert West from being medical students there. Dr. Halsey is like, Dan, you are getting your student loans taken away from you. And he's like, my student loans? But that means that I can't go to school here anymore. And Dr. Halsey's kind of like, exactly. So now that he can't afford to pay for school, Dan is officially banned from the medical hospital. He is no longer allowed on the premises. He is no longer allowed to work there, operate on any patients whatsoever. He doesn't listen to that though. He shows up the next day in his scrubs. All of his employees, they don't know any better. They've been working with him for several years. They just expect him to show up to work as he always does. So he shows up to work and he's pushing a dead body covered in a sheet like he always does, transporting it down to the morgue like he always does. He runs into the security guard like normal, walks straight into that morgue. Only the security guard is like, what she got today? Tries to lift up the sheet to look at the dead body, which is a little bit weird.
You ain't got my lunch under there, have you?
Yeah, one meatball run over by a semi.
Ugh.
Well, as soon as they get through the morgue door, bam! Underneath that sheet was Herbert West. Yeah, that's right. Dan snuck Herbert West into the morgue, who was disguised as being a dead body. This is another one of those scenes where I feel like this is a Pretty Little Liars episode. Everything always goes back to Pretty Little Liars for me, doesn't it? So, as an audience, we're all like, why? What is going on here? Obviously, they have some sort of plan that we are not privy to at this moment. Well, they are now proceeding to look at all of the bodies in the morgue. They're reading their tags, like the name of the person, how they died, that sort of thing. They're like, not this one, they were shot in the head. Not this one, they were crushed by a semi-truck. Not this one, not this one. And I'm like, okay, who are you looking for? Well, finally, they find a John Doe. Anonymity, always a plus when you're doing a crime. But also, what is very vital to Herbert West is that this body is in perfect condition. Not a single injury to be found. It's just one of those cases where he maybe mysteriously died from a heart attack, some sort of internal medical failure. This is the first time in the whole movie where I was finally, a little bit bored. This scene in the morgue, it slows down. The dialogue isn't very exciting here. It doesn't take a lot of, thinking, Well, they inject this John Doe with the green serum that they injected Rufus with earlier in the movie.
Human dosage factor is unknown. Increasing the dosage 20 cc's.
Well, Dr. Halsey catches wind that Dan showed up for work today. So he is on the hospital medical school premises and he is like, where is he? Why are you allowing him to be on the premises? He is not even authorized to be working today. Well, the nurse is like, yeah, well, he checked into work and he's at the morgue right now. And also, Meg is there, and she's like, Daddy, no! Daddy, I love him! You can't do this to him, please! And he's like, how dare you follow me here? And she's like, I'm gonna follow you everywhere you go because I love him! And so he tells the nurse, hey, watch this girl. You need to keep your eye on her while I go down to the morgue and sort things out, okay? So Meg is stuck up there at the reception area with the nurse as Dr. Halsey goes down to the mortuary to find out what's up. So it takes longer than Herbert expected, you know. A human body tends to do that when you're comparing it to a small squirrel or black kitty cat. Damn! That body's up and at him nonetheless. Probably about, I don't know, 17 seconds later, it's like, it's got blood seeping out of his mouth. Almost like the way a dog looks whenever it has rabies, only instead of foaming at the mouth, it's blood at the mouth. Fun fact, this man is the very same man who plays the body double for Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator movies. This man, he's like, rah! He's so strong. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, he is butt-ass naked whenever he stands up. We do see the booty, and we also see him hang dong. This is actually the only penis we see in the entire movie, but I am very happy that we do see it. So Dr. Halsey, you know, he's in the morgue now, and he's hearing some kind of commotion, because on the other side of the morgue door, you know, this wrestler is throwing these two guys around. I mean, these two guys, they may be handsome, but they aren't no weightlifters, okay? And they are no match to this undead wrestler guy. Terminator, if you will. So he's throwing them around. Dr. Halsey hears this, and he tries to get in the morgue door, which it's like one of those doors, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, that would hold like the big cooler. It's like one of those metal doors that are probably this thick, and they have like the special latch handles. It's locked on the other side, so he can't get in, and he's like trying with all his might to get in. Well, Mr. Terminator busts down the door and jumps on it, crushing Dr. Halsey underneath. He's like, ugh! And the two weakling doctors are like, no! And they'll go out to try to fight, but of course they are no match for our Hulk. Then he grabs the body from underneath the door and bites off Dr. Halsey's fingers. Throws him against the wall like a rag doll. Dan is like, oh my god, what do we do? You know, they don't stand a chance. And with the amount of times that this guy is throwing around Dr. Halsey, he is for sure dead. So I'm like, Dan, why are you even freaking out? Because he's obviously dead right now. Well, Herbert West, calm as he always is like, don't you worry. He busts open this glass and pulls out the skull saw.
Look out.
He grabs that skull saw and he turns it on. You guys know the movie high-pitched saw sound. That's exactly the sound we hear right now. It's beautiful, beautiful sound, really. And he goes towards that muscular body, plunges it into his heart. At first, I was like, oh, he's gonna decapitate him. I totally thought he was about to decapitate this guy. But no, he didn't decapitate him. Instead, he aimed for the heart, which, undead, reanimated zombie situation. I guess the heart is what you want to go for. Either the heart or the brains. He chose the heart. He falls dead for the second time. Aftermath. Dan is just frozen with shock. He is in full, fetal position. I'm baby. I don't know who I am. Unconscious mode. Herbert West is pretty unaffected. Although he is very quick to jump into action. He's like, this is the freshest body I've ever had.
Is he dead?
Of course. Will you give me a hand here?
Now, he interrupted an important experiment in progress. Granted, it was an accident, but this is the freshest body that we could come across, save of killing one ourselves. And every moment that we spent talking about it cost us results. Now, will you give me a hand?
So yeah, he's just lying there covered in blood, beat to death, you know, and Dan, you know, Dan at this point, you know, even though I called him handsome earlier in this video, I now revoke that statement. Dan he's just a little bitch. Like, he will literally do whatever Herbert West tells him to do because they have some sort of, like, unhealthy, toxic, homoerotic relationship going on where, you know, he's got, you know, his fiancée Megan, but little does he know he has this passion for men that he's never explored before until he met the great Herbert West. And now it's just like he'll do anything for Herbert West because he's finally realized, you know, he loves men. At least that's what I read into it. So yeah, he's a little simp for Herbert West. So he helps him pick up Mr. Halsey's body. They lay him on the table. Herbert draws up that injection tube and injects that lifeless body with that neon green serum. So the nurse that is in charge of watching Mr. Halsey's daughter Megan, of course, she's called to some unknown emergency. She has to run off immediately. Megan's like, my supervisor's gone. Maybe I should sneak off to the morgue to find these boys so I can sort things out. So that's exactly what she does. 17 seconds after they inject Mr. Halsey with the mysterious neon green serum, bam! His eyes are open and he's bleeding out of the mouth like a rabid Cujo.
You once did me a favor by letting me into your medical school. Doctor, welcome back to life.
Meg is now on the very same floor of the morgue. She approaches an empty guard station. She walks right past that empty table where he usually sits and enters the morgue. Yes, our only person of color in the whole film, he's not at his station whenever he is needed most.
Break time.
It's like a microaggression to have the only person of color in your whole movie be portrayed as a lazy night shift security guard who would rather jerk off to a porn magazine than do his actual job. That is like the definition of a microaggression if I've ever heard one. And I mean, it's outdated and it shows. A big trope in old slashers, even slashers today will still have, but it's specifically rampant in the 80s. They have the only people of color in their movies. They're either one of the first people killed or they are portrayed as a stereotype of the race. So, Dr. Halsey sprung to life, just like the Arnold Schwarzenegger body double, you know, who became very violent when he was reanimated with this green serum. Yes, Dr. Halsey, predictably, does the exact same thing. He springs to life and he just wants to cause violence. Very much like a rabid dog. Reanimation, rabies, a lot of the same symptoms here. And Megan, of course, in this very same moment, is like, Dad? Daddy, are you in there? Walks in to see her father choking 2 men at once. He's got a man in one hand, a man in another. There's a gay joke in there somewhere. No! She's like, no, Dad! How could you stop? Stop! And Dan is also very upset.
Shot. Don't worry.
The police officer finally comes into the room. He's like, I gotta call the cops.
I'm calling the police.
Herbert West is very calm in this situation and handles it appropriately by lying. He's like, listen, I just was here and Dr. Halsey went crazy and he tried to attack the two of us. You know, blaming everything on Dr. Halsey.
You see, Halsey came in, he grabbed
that thing. And, well, went crazy.
Megan is like, how could this be true? I mean, he was mad at you guys, but he wasn't that mad. But ultimately, you know, no one's gonna listen to a woman. So, Dr. Halsey ends up in a padded room. Yeah, that's right, Dr. Halsey. He ends up in a padded room, all by himself in a straitjacket. But on the other side of this, sort of like police glass, where it's like a mirror on one side, and then on the outside, it's a window into the padded room. Megan and Dr. Hill are watching Dr. Halsey, and she's like, oh, how could this happen? And Dr. Halsey's like, listen, I'm a doctor, and if there's one thing I know, it's that we have got to find out what happened about that night. Megan and Dr. Hill are sadly looking in at the man Dr. Halsey has become, an unrecognizable, rabid man. Dr. Hill doesn't seem to believe West's story about what happened that night. Meg, being put in charge of her father, has to agree to sign some papers in order to allow Dr. Hill to do some experimental procedures to find out what happened. So Dr. Hill is strongly encouraging that Meg sign these papers. She is also very determined to know what happened that night because she doesn't understand it herself. So ultimately she signs those papers, allowing Dr. Hill to do these procedures. And this is where my intuition from earlier really starts to play out. If it wasn't obvious before, it is very clear now that Dr. Hill has a thing for our blonde babe, Meg. He's telling her, like, oh God, honey, like, I know you're just feeling so alone right now, and I want you to have someone to talk to. And when you feel like there's someone you need to talk to, I want it to be me. And he starts inching his face closer and closer to Meg, like he's gonna lean into a kiss.
Or if you're ever lonely. I know you're all by yourself now.
So he almost hits on her. He almost gets this kiss with Meg whenever, bam, jump scare. They get interrupted by her father banging his head on the glass. And at this point, I'm like, what? It seems like Dr. Halsey's office is in the very same room that his padded cage is in. What? He literally has a padded cage in his office. This is probably another one of the more disturbing things in this movie. What kind of dystopian reality is this medical school in? Fucking freaky, and the walls shake when he throws his body violently against the padded walls. She goes home and Dan is there. Dan has this big welt on the side of his face. He looks haggard. She's like, what did you do to him? What did you do to my dad? She slaps him. Not only does she slap him, but she slaps him twice.
He's not insane.
He's not insane. He's dead, Dan says. And Meg sobs. I'm like, okay, girl, you're like so quick to believe that. I mean, either way, it's really upsetting to hear that, but it's true. He's not really insane. He's dead. Meg's like, you're insane. Then we see that West is in his basement doing science as usual. While creeping up behind him down the basement stairs is creepy old, slender man, weird-toothed Dr. Hill. Yeah, the creep, the pervert. He's like, what are you doing here? Dr. Hill starts talking about Dr. Halsey, how peculiar it is.
When we both know he is quite dead.
So, this scene, it really does come out of nowhere. I mean, how did Dr. Hill get in the basement anyways? We didn't see that, but Dr. Hill, if you remember from earlier, was going to do surgery on Dr. Halsey's brain. Yes, well, from that surgery, he has concluded that Dr. Halsey's dead. I mean, medical science can detect a corpse from an alive person, can't they? Well, it turns out that Dr. Hill is just as greedy as Herbert West, if not more, because he wants money, he wants power, he wants glory, just like Herbert West. He's like, listen, buddy, you're not gonna be the one to discover this whenever it comes down to the history and science book. Honey, those books are all gonna be written about moi, because I'm the one that's discovered it. Dr. Hill, the creep, is greedy. He wants this discovery all to himself. So, what does he decide to do? Threaten, of course. Just like Herbert West had threatened Meg and Dan earlier, you know, about how he was going to get them kicked out of school for their inappropriate relationship between the dean's daughter, you know, that sort of thing. Well, now Dr. Hill, he's playing the same trick that Herbert West played. Great minds think alike, no? So he's like, guess what, honey? I am gonna have this discovery all for myself. And guess what else? You're gonna let me do it? Because if you don't, I'm gonna frame you for murdering Dr. Halsey, of course. Oh, very catty. Very mean girl. Very Regina George Dr. Hill, if you don't mind me saying.
You will do what I tell you to do.
And people think girls are the only ones that are catty. So Dr. Hill is like, I'm gonna be famous. And he takes the serum, puts it in a little slide, and examines it under a microscope. He's doing science, you know, downloading the data. It's at this moment where I'm like, okay, hold on. Are they not gonna explain this green serum? Because earlier in the movie, I was definitely wondering, where did this green serum come from? Kind of a blaring question that any audience would have. Well, we are now at least halfway in the movie, and I still don't have an explanation for what this green serum is, where it comes from, and how Dr. Herbert West got his hands on it. It is not explained. I mean, I feel like even a Marvel movie, the lowest of low movies in my mind, would explain a thing like that. This is another reason why I feel like this movie was longer than the original release of what we saw. I mean, that's typically the case for any movie that you see. They always cut out the parts that, you know, the general public wouldn't find as interesting. That's why we get longer extended editions, like the Lord of the Rings extended editions or the Zack Snyder cut of the Justice League. This movie, I feel like it has so many missing pieces in it. So many things that I feel like were probably explained at one point, and then to cut the time length down, they maybe took out a couple of scenes that would make things make more sense. I mean, that's just me. Maybe it's just a bad B movie that doesn't think about those things. As Dr. Hill's examining the mysterious green serum, Herbert West, like a coward, sneaks up behind Dr. Hill. I mean, Dr. Hill's back is turned and everything. He grabs the shovel and attacks Dr. Hill with the shovel. He beats him a couple of times before ultimately decapitating Dr. Hill completely. Dr. Hill had no chance of defending himself. That's fucked up and cowardly if you ask me. What does a person do in the movie Re-Animator whenever someone dies? I bet you guys know the answer to this one. Ding, ding, ding! They inject them with the bright green mysterious serum! And that is exactly what Herbert West decides to do to the now decapitated Mr. Hill. Only this time, the procedure's a little different, because instead of giving a mega load to one whole human body, he gives a little bit to the head, a little bit to the body. A little bit like the Tin Man, whenever he gets all rusted from the rain. Do-do-do-do-do. Little bit of grease there. Do-do-do-do. Little bit of grease there. Back to life, Dr. Hill is.
He shut his mouth.
This time, for some unknown, unexplained reason, the body can talk. Not only is the body reanimated, not only is the body strong and furious, the body can also, bam, talk intelligent thought. Predictably, the body violently comes for West, knocks West out cold. So Dan breaks into the office at his medical school and is doing some late night sleuthing. He's going through the file cabinet. He's learning a thing or two. And his girlfriend, Meg, is there because she wants to try and talk to her daddy without any supervision because she believes that she can talk some sense into him. You know, everyone thinks it's unsafe for her to go into this padded room by herself, but she truly believes if she just goes in there, asks her dad what happened that night, that he's gonna be able to tell her. A girl can dream, can't she? Meg follows through with her plan. She goes into the padded room. Whenever Meg turns her father and sees that his head is bloody, she screams, "What did Hill do?" Dan is like, "He lobotomized him."
Your father's been lobotomized.
What? Y'all remember how Meg signed those papers allowing him to do experimental procedures to find out what had happened to Mr. Halsey? Well, instead of doing that, he freaking took out Mr. Halsey's brain. Yes, he had a lobotomy, you guys. He's completely brain dead at this point. Completely! West comes to, and Dr. Hill is completely gone. His stuff is gone. His notes are gone. The serum's gone, except for the ones upstairs.
You took my serum! Except for what I have upstairs.
This is the first time we see Herbert West's composure out of whack. He is freaking the out. His countenance was out of order.
My work!
So Dan comes down the basement stairs. He's like, whoa, 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 what's going on? So West comes clean because if he's gonna confide in anyone, it's gonna confide into his lover, Dan, his buddy, his roommate.
And they were roommates.
Oh my God, they were roommates.
So he's like, yeah, so Dr. Hill was here and I had to murder him.
I had to kill him!
Dan honestly could be more mad in this situation, but I mean, he's upset, but he could be more upset than that. Finding out his friend just killed another person. He's killed like probably one alive person, one dead person, and several reanimated dead alive animals and rodents and pets and such. So Herbert West, bit of a serial killer profile going on here. I just think that Dan is so in love with Herbert West. That's the only explanation for why he doesn't cut ties with him. You know, he just kind of does whatever he wants. Whenever Herbert West tells him to do something, he's gonna do it. Then Dan is like, brain blast! That is why Dr. Hill did the lobotomy on Dr. Halsey. Yeah, it is because he doesn't want Dr. Halsey to go blabbing around to everyone about how he became a zombified version of himself.
So he could protect his discovery.
Yes.
Very clever.
So now Dr. Hill's decapitated body is carrying around Dr. Hill's decapitated head in a sort of like metal tray dish. It's the very dish you might see at a salad bar holding your salad. It's just your standard metal, probably 3-inch thick dish. Yep, he's got his head in there. The body puts the head down to go fetch a blood pouch, and for some reason just kind of squirts the blood pouch empty into the head tray. I don't know why. Dr. Hill seems to be enjoying it. Like, why? What's the point with the blood besides just like pure pleasure? Because immediately after squirting the pouch empty into this metal tray, the body picks up the head and just starts walking around with it. So, why am I even asking about the logic in this B horror movie? That's also a good question. Dr. Hill, like I said, he's got the ability to talk now. And one of the first words he learned since being reanimated, his favorite word, is to say, Alan.
Alan.
Soon as Dr. Halsey hears those words, Dr. Halsey's first name is Alan. He bows down. He's like, oh, the master said my name. Dr. Hill is like, Alan, it's time for you to come out now. Another gay undertone in this movie is Alan coming out. Y'all know that very familiar path that any doctor takes when transporting a dead body down to the morgue, past the guard. Dr. Hill decides to take this journey down to the morgue to proceed with his diabolical plan. Well, Dr. Hill obviously decapitated at this point, but also reanimated. His brain has the bright idea to use a dummy head. The kind of dummy heads they use in medical school. The guard's like, oh, is that you, Dr. Hill? Dr. Hill, from inside the bag the decapitated body is holding, says, oh yeah, it's me, Dr. Hill.
It's better.
This movie, it doesn't spell things out. It does quite the opposite. You're forced to draw your own conclusions about what is going on here. So I was like, okay, it seems like Dr. Hill, dismembered as he is, he intends to go to the hospital morgue, which is where he is now. He wants to pick out the perfect body, just like Herbert West had done earlier in the film when he picked out that perfect John Doe, muscular Terminator body double guy, brought him back to life. He was perfect because he didn't have any physical bodily damage. Well, now Dr. Hill is doing that very same thing. He's at the morgue. Seems like he's trying to find the right body to put his head onto that body, and his body is gonna do that surgery. Oh my god, if we're logically trying to make sense of this movie, we have a lot of questions to sort through, like, why is he surgically putting his head on a body instead of his own body? And if that's just too complicated and that's why he has to have like a fake body because he can't, do the surgery on himself, what is gonna happen to his body whenever his head is on a corpse? Like, now his head has his own body, but does his head also still control his original body? So then he has, like, Dr. Hill's head has two bodies, like the one it's attached to, and then a headless version of his body. A lot of questions. So Dan goes to see Meg. He feels really bad about everything that's gone down between them. And Meg is like, I don't know if I can forgive you. I mean, so much this happened between us. I mean, I really wanted to hate you. I wanted to hate you. And as she says this, their faces get closer, closer, just like a mirrored version of Dr. Hill whenever he was talking to Meg, and his face was coming closer and closer to Meg's face. Well, just like that scene with Dr. Hill with the bam bam jump scare, we get another whoosh jump scare where Dan and Meg's kiss is interrupted by her father busting through the open door. Her father is a full-fledged zombie at this point, and he takes out Dan immediately and knocks out Meg. Zombie movie! This movie has turned into a zombie movie now. Halsey brings his unconscious daughter to the morgue. Of course, Dr. Hill gets her naked. That's the very first thing you do whenever you are left alone with a woman in an 80s movie. You're gonna get her naked. We're gonna see those boobies. So she's naked. I'm like, okay, murder time. Whenever you see the boobs, you know the blood is gonna follow. Wow, this movie is much more sinister than that. You know, the pervert is alone with an unconscious, naked Meg. I think you guys can tell where this is going. Yeah.
I've always admired your beauty, my dear.
He starts to sexually assault Meg, and it's not easy to watch. We have to watch our beloved Meg get sexually assaulted in the most horrific and gruesome way possible. Yeah, the decapitated body is assaulting her unconscious, and then whenever she comes to and is reasonably horrified, screaming her head off, get it? Head, because yeah, Dr. Hill's body holds that decapitated head and forces himself on Meg. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be not as graphic as possible, but again, this is like a very shocking and appalling scene. But guess what? Bam, bam, bam! West, bad guy turned hero, comes in to the rescue. He's like, I'm very disappointed in you.
You steal the secret of life and death, and here you are trysting with the bubble-headed co-ed. You're not even a second-rate scientist.
Dan runs to Meg's rescue, you know, unrestrains her, covers up her naked, vulnerable body with a jacket and towels. She's very grateful for this.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
And then all hell breaks loose. Like all of the bodies at once, in unison, springs to life, and they start attacking Meg and Dan. For some reason, they're not really attacking West at first, until West pulls out a serum and tries to stick it in somebody, but then they attack him finally. And West, oh, this is another time where I redact my statement of me ever saying Herbert West is attractive, because man can't fight. His little wrist gets hurt, and he can't fight anymore. And so they grab West, they bring him to the table, and they restrain him the way they restrained Meg. You know, they get the laser torch thing going in for the forehead, and they're gonna do some dirty work on Herbert West. Dr. Hill is giving his evil speech. He's like, this is why reanimated bodies are the best, because I have all the power. They do whatever I tell them to do.
He makes possible a new technique in lobotomy, which results in total mastery of the human will.
Obviously this came before The Last of Us, but it's like The Last of Us zombie logic. They're all like zombie, one unison, mushroom mentality. for some reason, Hill has control over, like, everybody. So whatever happens to Hill happens to everyone. So Megan is just trying her best as she's getting attacked to get her father to recognize her. She's like, Daddy, it's me. Don't you recognize me? It's me, Megan. And we're like, girl, you've tried this before. We're so over it. Stop.
Daddy, listen to me. It's Megan.
But all of a sudden, Halsey's like, and he gets really furious and he stops trying to fight Megan and he turns and he starts fighting Dr. Hill. Halsey goes to Dr. Hill's head and starts squeezing it, and we see that all the other bodies are like, ow! Like their head is getting squeezed because Dr. Hill's head is getting squeezed. And then West, while all this is happening to the bodies and they're distracted, he's like, shh, overdose!
Overdose!
And he injects not one, but 2 bright green serums into Mr. Hill's body. Then Dr. Hill's intestine springs out of his body and like a boa constrictor wraps around Herbert West. Herbert West is like being choked by this enlarged intestine. Then all of the bodies turn against each other. They're ripping each other apart. Meg and Dan run out of the morgue. They go to the hallway towards the elevator, but they're getting chased by this naked man who's disgusting. He takes Dan down, starts choking Dan, and Dan is able to finally get away. And so they go into the elevator, and you're like, oh my god, why didn't they take the stairs? That's what I was saying, at least. And of course, like I predicted, they should have taken the stairs because those elevator doors don't close fast enough. And another naked man, the scariest thing in the world, springs into the elevator, starts choking Meg, and Dan is there like, no, stop, get off of her. And he is barely lifting a finger trying to defend Meg. Like, it is so frustrating because he gets up and he runs away and he's still like crushing Meg's neck. Dan goes and gets the fire axe, hacks the guy. But it's too late, of course. Meg is already dead by the time he hacks the guy. I'm like, why? Why didn't you just fight back better? He is so sad for Meg. He carries her up to the hospital floor, which I haven't even thought of, like what the upper levels of the hospital, like if they're even aware of what's going on downstairs in the morgue. I don't know, but it seems like that might be the case because everyone's just kind of running around upstairs in a fury, but as soon as they see Dan, you know, with an unconscious Meg, they go into the room. And this is a scene that mirrors the very first scene we ever saw Dan, because Dan is doing his chest compressions, only this time, instead of some woman we are unfamiliar with, it is a naked Meg, boobies out, getting the chest compression. They're trying to revive her, but her lifeline is still flat. It doesn't work. This time he knows when to stop. He kisses her lifeless body. Final thoughts. I don't know what to make of this movie. I truly, at the beginning of this movie, I never expected Herbert West to become a hero, protagonist, archetype. Whenever Herbert West was introduced, he was the villain of the story. He was the man that killed poor, helpless Rufus and brought his tortured body back to life. I mean, that was so cruel, but eventually Dr. Hill became the villain of the story. So, the moral of the story is that creepy perverts are evil. I don't know what to think about the several parallels between Herbert West and Dr. Hill. In a lot of ways, they have the same motivations. They want money, they want power, they want glory by any means necessary. They don't care about life. They don't care about loved ones. They don't seem to have empathy in their brain. But for some reason, at the end, I end up rooting for Herbert West and hating Dr. Hill. I mean, truly, if we're comparing and contrasting the two characters, mostly their entire characters are the exact same, except for Dr. Hill, who is a creepy pervert. That's the only difference. I mean, Herbert West never made any sexual advances towards Meg, and he was her roommate.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
I mean, on par with Dr. Hill's craving for power, you know, one of the ways he exerts that power is through sexual violence, which is exactly what he does to Meg. I didn't expect to get what I got. Honestly, it surprised me in a lot of ways. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and I liked that about this movie. If you know me, you can probably guess my favorite part of this movie is the props and special effects. This movie goes above and beyond with makeup on all of its extras, on the bloody props that they've created to be lifeless corpses with their blood and guts coming out. I mean, that intestine that shoots out of a open body decapitated Mr. Hill, it gets a trophy from me. So good. The only other movie that I can compare this movie to is the original Evil Dead movie. It's kind of that same sort of like campy, handmade, but excellent props. This movie also gets snaps for the gore factor. This movie does not disappoint. There's buckets and buckets of blood from the very beginning to the very end. It also has great one-liners, lots of witty dialogue. It's got that classic 80s horror soundtrack that revamps at all the best parts. And I think all of those pros make up for like the 2 times during this movie where I felt bored. The movie lulled at a couple of parts, one of the parts being whenever Herbert West and Dan first went into the morgue to find that John Doe body. Another part being whenever Dr. Halsey was reprimanding Dan for coming clean about what happened. Just a couple of parts of this movie had a lull, a little bit of a slower pace where I kind of like wanted to zone out for a minute, but other than that, this movie was an exciting, bloody fun time. I would rank this movie 7 out of 10 neon green injection tubes. I also want to take a moment to thank my Patreon supporters. I really appreciate you guys. I really appreciate you all, and I just want to let you know that if you ever have the inclination in your heart to support me, my Patreon is a great place to do that. So thank you to my Patreon supporters. I love you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Until next time, Camcorder Cameron signing out.